Thank you so much for listening to Urbanistica podcast. I am Mustafa Sharif, an urban planner, and you're more than welcome to join my big journey of exploring the making of smarter and more livable cities. Please don't forget to follow Urbanistica on the different social media platforms, and also let's connect on LinkedIn. Big thanks to Urbanistica podcast partner AFRY. AFRY is an international engineering and design company providing sustainable solutions in the fields of energy, industry, and infrastructure. Are you ready for a new episode? Let's go for it. This is a new episode in collaboration with the Center for the Future of Places here in Stockholm. I have the pleasure to welcome Andy Karvonen to Urbanistica podcast. Hey, and welcome, Andy.
Hey, Mustafa. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much for giving your valuable time to record this episode. How are you doing, Andy?
Oh, doing great. Everybody's kind of struggling through COVID, but we're trying to stay safe and healthy and not spend too much time online.
And by the way, in which city are you now?
So I'm in Stockholm, and I've lived here for about 4.5 years, and it's a lovely place to be in COVID lockdown. There's lots of great places to explore here in the city and get out in the wilds and really enjoy it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I see it's snowing now, right? It's like in the beginning of May.
Yes, yeah, we're late April, but yes, we're getting snow today. So that seems to be very common here in Stockholm. But summer is on the way. It's coming in the next month or two.
You you have a big hope for the summer. It's coming.
I've got my fingers crossed, my thumbs held, everything.
Awesome. So Andy, you are our storyteller for this episode. How would you like to introduce yourself and tell us about your passion?
Yeah, so I'm a researcher and I'm a teacher, and I am really passionate about sustainable urban development. So I'm interested in the way that cities have changed over history and how they're changing now and how they're going to change in the future. And it's an endless conversation. There's always more things to talk about. There's always more things to disagree on and to debate about. But as everybody says, cities are where people will be living in the future, and so it's a fascinating subject.
When did you start to be so passionate about cities?
I think I started to get interested in cities through sustainability. So I did an undergraduate degree in civil and environmental engineering, and I wanted to find ways to use technology and to use innovation to clean up the environment. So we had wastewater and we had contaminated air, noise issues, and were there ways that we could engineer places so that we could reduce environmental impacts? And from there, I started to work as a sustainable building consultant. So I was working in the United States, and so I was working on things like the LEED Green Building Rating System. And then I started to get really interested in buildings and sites around buildings. And then you start to think about, okay, what does sustainability mean when we talk about it on a city scale or on a regional scale? And then I was hooked. That was it.
I understand. So tell me more about like your childhood. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota. So for people that don't know, Minnesota is in the center of the United States, in the Midwest. It's north of Chicago. It's a wonderful place to grow up, except for the weather. But it's a really vibrant and enjoyable place. And so I grew up in a quintessential inner city neighborhood, where I walked to school until I was maybe 14 years old. Very tight knit community. We had a main street, and just it was an idyllic sort of childhood, and it's still there. The neighborhood where I grew up is called St. Anthony Park, just a wonderful place. And then I moved around the country. I went to Seattle and got a master's degree and worked. And then I went to Austin, Texas, and got a PhD. And then went to the United Kingdom, and then came here to Sweden about 4.5 years ago. So I've been really fortunate to kind of look at different urban conditions, different regional conditions, and compare and contrast them. And every place has similarities, but every place is also has its own story to tell, has has different ways that it's developed over time, and that continually keeps me engaged.
Yeah, that's amazing journey, and I would love now you tell us about your story with the Center for the Future of Places. Like, how did everything start?
With the Center for the Future of Places, I really got to know them when I moved to Stockholm in 2016, and I met Tigran Haas, and we had a lot of things in common with respect to urbanization and our interests. And he was really interested in the work that I do, particularly on smart cities and on digitalization, and this role that technology plays in urban development. And so we started with conversations about that, and then I've been involved in a lot of different events and research projects, and it's kind of snowballed from there. So yeah, so I bring to the center sort of this interest in technology and place and people, and so if we look at a public space, let's say we look at a street, and you could say, okay, there's a sidewalk and there's a street where the cars and bicycles drive, right? But then you also have to think about all the things that are below the street, all the different pipes and wires and things like that. When you start to change a street, you disrupt all these different circulations of cities. And so you have to think through those things and what the implications of those are. So the argument is that that technology plays a very fundamental role in urban development and urban change. And so we need to pay close attention to that.
I would love that we talk more about like your image about our future and smart cities, and if robots gonna kill us and AI and so on. But before we go there, tell us more about your contribution to the center. Like,
yeah, so we published a book a few years ago called Inside Smart Cities, and this was really sort of a critical examination of the smart cities agenda. And so we collected different articles we collected different research findings from around the world, and got a really nice comparison of how smart is being interpreted, how it's being enacted in specific areas of the world. And what we find is a huge amount of diversity in different ways, that in some ways, we're seeing them repackaging particular agendas and calling them smart. But in other ways, we're seeing completely new urban systems that are being developed that are based on ICT, on information communication technologies. So it's a real wide range of ways that we're trying to smarten up cities.
So you made the different categories within what is smart means.
Yeah, and so we were doing we were looking across all these different cities, and one idea was that you need to contextualize, you need to ground your ideas about smart in particular places. Another is that you need to take smart technologies and integrate them and align them with a particular narrative of a city or of a region. Another was we started to look at contradictions and challenges. So when you introduce a new traffic system, what happens when everybody doesn't comply with that traffic system? What do you do about that? And then the final thing that we were thinking about was sort of the experience and the encountering of digital technologies and how people engage on a very personal level. So if you think about, our mobile phones have now become the center of our lives, right? And in the future, we're going to have that same sort of digital layer that goes across whatever city we live in. And we're going to be engaging with technology, not only with our phones, not only in our homes, but also at the workplace and everywhere in between. And so I mean, there's some really exciting things about that, but there's also some very scary kind of implications of leading this digital lifestyle. and there's a lot of people that are studying digitalization, from all different disciplines and, different perspectives. And, I think that for me, the interesting thing is to think about it through the lens of the city.
Did you manage in the book to have a definition of what is a smart city?
Yeah, this is a great question. There's a huge debate about what a smart city is, and what you'll see in any kind of publication is one of the first things they say is there is no common definition of smart cities.
Okay.
And so we just started kind of with this basic understanding of when you apply information and communication technologies to a city, we would consider that to be some sort of a smart city. There are people that promote smart cities that don't have any technologies involved. They just say if we're planning in a really intelligent way, that's a smart city. And we say, well, yes, technically, I guess you could say that. But it has to have some sort of element of information and communication technologies. Somehow, the internet, the World Wide Web, needs to connect up some different functions of a city. But beyond that, I think actually not having a definition of a smart city is helpful. That sounds crazy. It's like, well, how do we even know what we're talking about? But it's the same thing with sustainability. When people say, what is sustainability? And we're like, well, I don't know. It's it's sort of economy and environment and equity, right? But it's the same thing with smart cities. Is that we don't have a real strong definition of it. But at the same time, that's helpful because then we can draw in different debates. We can draw in different perspectives, and we can have a conversation. But I mean, it's very important when we start, to say what do we mean, when we're talking about the smart city. So
exactly, at least to have like a kind of common ground somehow, and then you can open up for different paths. Because when I interviewed different people and I asked them what is a smart city or how do you define a smart city, I got that smart city, like, it doesn't need to be integrated with data. It's about how you plan it in a very smart way so people can meet each other. We have a good ecosystem and so on.
Yeah. So I mean, I would still call that good urban planning.
Yeah.
So I do, I guess I do have an idea of what a smart city is, and it's very much, sort of technology based. But then how you use that technology, and it could be a dumb technology. You could say that, the glasses that I'm wearing are a technology, or, the pen that I use or piece of paper is a technology. So you can stretch it out. It doesn't need to be, the latest and greatest artificial intelligence that you're using. There's, very, very, LED lights. That's a technology, and you can do a lot of amazing things with LED lights, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But Andy, if I ask you as Andy, how do you imagine a smart city, if you can describe it for us?
Yeah. So I mean, the way that we usually see smart cities promoted is of a shiny new city that was built on a blank slate, on tabula rasa, and it's the shiny towers, and they're made of glass and steel, and everything functions. And it's great when I do smart city presentations because I can go on the web and I can find these illustrations, and they're really enticing. Really, they really draw you in. But that's not a smart city, and so the smart city that I see is the one that's retrofitted onto the existing urban fabric. So whether we're in Stockholm or whether we're in Karachi or whether, it doesn't matter where you are around the world, what we're doing is we're taking these, different wires and boxes, and sensors and various antenna and stuffing those into the existing smart city, or the existing city, and that's the smart city. It's this enhanced version of the existing city. And so it's going to be messy, it's going to be ugly, it's going to be it's going to be haphazard, it's going to be ad hoc. And but that's really interesting, right? Because that's how cities develop. They don't develop from scratch, unless you're Masdar City or you're Songdo. These are kind of very famous smart cities around the world, and they started with nothing. But for the most part, smart cities, they're going to look a lot like cities we have today. They're just going to have this kind of invisible layer of technology that hopefully helps them run better.
Yeah, exactly. But how much time you think it will take until we are there that our cities will have this digital layer, until we are like a smart city.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a really great question. So there's projections about things that are going to happen over the next 5 years or 10 years. So if you look at autonomous vehicles, for example, let's just wait 5 years, let's just wait 10 years. I think to really get a city that's fundamentally different than the one we have today, we're looking at the time scale of 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. But it's going to be a very gradual, incremental type of process, right? And it's going to be about adding new things and subtracting other things, very gradually over time. And it'll probably be slow enough that we won't really recognize it. I mean, if you think about the way that we pay for things right now, where we have a credit card and we just blip, and I tell people from other countries, I go, I don't touch currency anymore. I don't touch cash. I just have a credit card that I blip on everything. That's fairly recent that we've done that. But even that has taken, quite a while to go from the cash society to the cashless society. And so if we apply that to transportation, if we apply that to housing, if we apply that to energy, all the different things that make up the city, it takes a long time. And one of the things that people don't realize, or maybe people forget, is that changing things in cities takes a long time. Although if there's a bomb that goes off, or there's a natural disaster, things change like that, right? But for the most part, most of the stuff we do, it takes forever to get things to change, and that's one of the inherent things about cities. I mean, they're built to last, and so when you try to change them, they resist it. So it's this, we call it kind of this urban obduracy. They're stubborn. Cities are stubborn. They don't want to change. And so kind of putting in these smart technologies, it's happening, but it's this very slow kind of process. So I mean, it'll happen over our lifetimes, but it will never get to the end either. There's no sort of end goal for smart cities, unless you think of like sort of Star Trek as the end goal.
Yeah,
Which
something like
is
this.
quite a while for that.
Yeah, I'm also like now when you're reflecting, I remember, or like in Stockholm, when we do a building, it should last for 100 year. So like you have this rule at the same time, you need to be flexible and adapt to the new technology. So it's gonna take time until this building become super smart.
Yeah. No, I mean, so when you say if you have a building lifetime for 100 years, I'm not sure if they do that anymore. I feel like they build now for like 80 years, or 60 years. But even if it's for 60 years, you've basically locked in, that building for, the next 6 decades. And you can change it a little bit. People change buildings all the time. Um, but I mean, the decisions that we make today, whether it's about technology or whether it's about, where a road is located, it gets on, we call it kind of a path dependency. It gets into this, it gets into this particular track, and it's really hard to veer off of that track once you get it there. So I mean, that's one of the important things to think about smart cities is, what are we putting into place today, and what kind of opportunities does it open up for tomorrow, and what kind of opportunities does it close down. And potentially we're getting on a particular track that maybe we want to be on, but maybe we don't want to be on. And the more that we can keep things open, the more that we can allow for flexibility, then we can change when society changes, when the climate changes. So it's an interesting thing just to kind of look at the path dependencies of urban systems.
Exactly. And now I'm really actually curious to hear your reflection about the cities on Mars, like Bjarke Engels, Elon Musk, all these cities that gonna be up there. What do you think, or what is your reflection when you see these projects?
When I was a kid, I was really interested in space travel, and I thought, I want to be an astronaut. I want to go up in outer space. I think this would be wonderful. And as I've grown older, I think I've lost my romance with space. So I mean, I think going up into space and creating a new civilization on Mars or on the moon or something is a complete waste of time. And instead, we should be working on solving the issues that we have here on Earth, and expending our energy and resources here, rather than trying to branch out to new frontiers. So it's that doesn't sound very positive, does it? But I mean, but I think there's they're messing around up on Mars, but come on, we've got work to do here. Let's come back to Earth.
So I think it's better to focus on our planet and fix the issues or the challenges that we have here instead of just running to another planet.
Exactly. I mean, there are certainly, really interesting kind of, engineering, but also social issues to think about, if you were going to inhabit Mars. But I think there's more interesting things to do here.
Yeah, I understand you. So let's talk more about the technology in our planet, like Hyperloop, the self-driving cars, and so on. What do you think? Do you see there is a future for this kind of new technology, or no? Like, not really. One more also, like the let's say the spacemaker, the AI that plan.
Yeah. No, I think we're in really exciting times at the moment, and I think when we look at technology, the place that it's changing the most is in these small communication technologies like mobile phones and computers, and what we're just beginning to see is kind of the emergence of kind of broader implications of digitalization of information and communication technologies specifically. So it's still early days in ICT innovation, and we'll see where it leads. But I mean, one of the things that I've been looking at specifically is urban platforms or platform urbanization. So if you think about a company like Uber, or you think about a company like Airbnb, and they're reinventing mobility services, or they're reinventing housing services, and that's going to have fundamental changes to the way that cities function. And that's not even getting to Hyperloop, and that's not even getting to artificial intelligence. It's just basically using an app on your phone to do transportation differently, or to do housing in a different way. And we can already see how disruptive that is. And one of the interesting thing to me is to look at these companies and to see the approach that they take to innovation. And they're moving very quickly. And then we have local authorities and national authorities rapidly trying to keep up. So for instance, with Uber, thinking about the drivers, do the drivers need to have some sort of certification? Do they need to go through a criminal background check? Do they need to be licensed? Do they, who owns the car? Who owns the service? And there's all these really interesting, kind of questions that are not necessarily technical questions, but they get connected to this really wonderful app that we have that lets us hail a car if we need to go somewhere, right? So I mean, it's I think when I look at technology, I look at kind of the boring sides of it, and so we can introduce all these really kind of sexy high tech ideas. And we'll see where they go, but like artificial intelligence, that's exciting and scary all at the same time. Machine learning is what they're talking about these days, but it's also the kind of the basic infrastructure. Looking at wastewater infrastructure and water supply and electricity networks and gas networks. So there's a new trend now that's starting to pick up. And the idea is that we live in a very high carbon lifestyle at the moment, and one way to do that is to break our high carbon habit, and we can do that by not hooking up to natural gas systems, right? So when they do a new building, they say you are not allowed to hook up to a natural gas system. And so it's this sort of rollback, so we built out all these great infrastructure systems in the 20th century. In the 21st century, we're saying, let's not do that anymore.
Yeah.
or combustion engines, in automobiles and in trucks, and saying you can no longer drive this car in the city if you have a combustion engine in it. And and it's a really interesting thing. It's not about actually developing new technology. It's about banning an existing technology. So that's part of the debates too.
Yeah, but do you believe, or do you think in the future, let's say in 40 years, that we're gonna regret what we're developing now and say let's ban this stuff as how we do now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, yeah, I think we are going to be developing things today that we're going to regret in the future. So if we think about something like iPads, and you say iPads are great, but then you give an iPad to a 5-year-old, and they're already starting to come up with studies that say, actually with this adoption of technology, children are having negative effects in their learning. And so I think we're going to see other things that develop in the future, whether it's urban technologies or any kind of technologies, that we're going to say that wasn't such a good idea. But we did that in the 20th century, with various chemicals, nuclear weapons. There's all kinds of things that we've developed, and we say, oh, we let the genie out of the bottle. Can we put it back in? No, we can't put it back in the bottle. What are we going to do? But it's just that's an inherent that's an inherent quality of technological innovation. Is that some things are going to be beneficial and some things are going to be maybe detrimental, and so it takes there's some ethics involved in developing technologies.
Yeah, like even now we are regretting so much about letting cars in our downtowns and city centers. So this is like a very basic thing that we're already regretting after some years,
Yeah. And then if you say, okay, so if we don't want to have car dominated cities, are there ways that we can reverse that? Are there ways that we can roll that back to, a pedestrian city, to a compact city? And there are, we've got models for doing that, but then, so why is it that it doesn't happen faster? And there's just all kinds of gradients, or there's all kinds of tensions that result from trying to change those systems. But yeah, no, so we've definitely, we've done some great things though. So if we look at cities today, what an achievement, just what's been done over the last 100 years. But at the same time, what we've done, we've created this monster, that is consuming all kinds of things, that creates division in society, that creates division in wealth. So that's what's always fascinating to me, is that it's both, and it's never sort of cities are good or cities are bad. They're good and bad at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. You cannot have a perfect city.
No, but one of the things that planners and designers try to do is they do try to fix the bad things and enhance the lives of people. And so it's a very sort of hopeful discipline, and that we can create improved conditions for tomorrow.
Yeah, and also I wanted to ask you, because now like technology developing in a very crazy speed and very fast, how can we as planners keep the same speed? Like, what can we do?
The pace of technological development is racing ahead of the training that we have as urban planners, and our ability to react. So if we think about these platform companies like Airbnb and Uber, they're racing ahead of the urban authorities and their ability to regulate. And actually, that's part of their business model, is that they do things that are illegal and they wait for the local authority to catch up and penalize them. But by this time, then they're already embedded into the city, and so it's an innovation strategy. So yeah, I mean, so in terms of what can urban planners do, I mean, I think there's a real need for urban planners to be upskilled on technologies, and stay at the forefront of what's coming. You know, if it's automated vehicles, if it's artificial intelligence, if it's control centers that they're using to monitor and to evaluate and to potentially operate cities. They don't need to know how to program the computers, but they need to understand what the implications of that programming is. um, and so it's a really, what one of the things that's interesting to me is that there's a real parallel here with the early 20th century, at least in North America and Northern Europe, and the role of technical experts. So if you were around in the 1880s or 1890s, 1900s, and you look to see who's running cities, it was civil engineers, because they were the ones that were building, they were designing and building and maintaining these new infrastructure networks of water and wastewater, electricity, communications, transportation, right? Then as the 20th century went on, we started to get planners that took over, professional planners that took over, and they took over from the technocrats, these technical experts. But now with the smart city, potentially, this is a question more than a statement, but potentially we're getting the return of the technocrats, the return of these technical experts that are going to be steering cities in the future. So if you understand how to do machine learning, if you understand how to set up and manage and read a sensor network for temperature or for traffic, you've got a lot of power to steer urban development in particular ways. And potentially, if there are urban planners that are not up to speed, that don't have that expertise, then they get left behind. So there's a real need for this sort of upskilling of urban planners to stay ahead of the technological development, and so they can understand it, and so they can interpret it, and potentially choose some forms of technological development, but potentially not choose other forms.
I guess there are a lot of ways for professional urban planners to catch up with the technology and understand. But how about the students? Like, you're working a lot with the universities. Is there a work done there about smart city, integrating a smart cities, multidisciplinary groups of students? Or how do you introduce the young planners to the smart city world or to the developed world?
Yeah, I think, I think planning education is changing. I think planning education has always been interdisciplinary. And I think with the rise of smart cities and the rise of information and communication technologies, it needs to become more interdisciplinary. So that means we need to be talking to software developers. We need to be talking to computer scientists. We need to be talking to physicists, who can interpret all this type of data. So for me, I think that these are really enriching conversations. But to take an urban planner and just teach about planning theory and teach about planning history, I think those are very important topics, but they're not enough anymore. And so one of the ways that we try to do it is to do interdisciplinary teaching, where you can work on applied projects, whether it's in the classroom or whether it's out in the real world. And you bring in different ideas, different perspectives, and you try to enrich everybody's understanding of how technology and the city and people come together. So we've done some work in the urban ICT arena in Kista, and the idea to create a test bed where Ericsson and these other tech companies can trial new technologies. And so what we do up there is we get the students engaged with the urban ICT arena and get them engaged in that agenda. And you start to expand the agenda beyond sort of technological development to call it socio-technical development or urban development, and then you really to understand how a technology is embedded in a place and how it influences people. And that's exciting for everybody, including myself. It's not me teaching the students, it's me learning alongside the students. And we're like, wow, we could do, we could do like a food truck sharing service here in the urban ICT arena. How would that work? Okay, we need to have food trucks, but then we can rent them out to, particular kind of amateur chefs. And then they can, send a mobile message to people that are working in the offices at Shista. Hey, come down, the Greek food truck is here today. The Thai food truck is here today, and so just thinking about kind of ways to steer the smart city in ways that are beneficial to people.
Yeah. And when I usually talk about smart cities with my guests on the podcast, we end up talking about smart cities robots gonna take our places. In the smart city there is not the social aspect, no feelings, no harmony. What do you think? Because what I see is you're more like positive about smart city, technology. So where is the social aspect in the smart city?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of criticism of the smart city as being too much about technology and not enough about the actual residents of cities, the human beings, and that the robots are going to take over the world. And I think that's potentially true. I wouldn't say that I'm either positive or negative about the smart city. I think it has different implications. So I try to be kind of neutral about it. Probably compared to an engineer, I am fairly negative about the smart city. Compared to a social activist, look like I'm very positive about the smart city. So if I can irritate both of those camps at once, I feel like I'm in a good place, right? So one of the interesting things that we've seen over the last few years, particularly in the Nordic countries, is this idea that we need to think about the human beings. Smart with a heart is what they say. But there's also a lot about smart citizenship. And what we need to do is we need to start steering smart cities away from the technology and make it more citizen-centered. And I think that the poster child for this today is Barcelona. And Barcelona switched a few years ago from one form of government to a very, very different form of government. And they took the very traditional kind of top-down smart city agenda, and they completely reoriented it to be bottom-up. And they said, we're going to use the smart city to forward social agendas, which is completely the opposite way that smart cities are usually formulated. And so it's really about one of the problems with the smart city is it tends to start with a technology, and then it looks for some sort of problem to solve. And it says, look, we've got this great new sensor network. Where can we apply this, right? And when you start to look at smart with a heart, when you start to look at kind of citizen-centered smart urban development, what you look at is you say, what are the issues that we have here today? Do we have a housing problem? Do we have social equity issues that we need to resolve? And then you say, let's look across our palette of options, including technologies, but also non-technologies. And what can we use to address that problem? And then we start to get into this kind of citizen-centered smart city. And then it becomes very much about participatory planning, community-led planning, which we've been talking about for 50 years. And and then it becomes kind of the realm of planners. So if we think about a technology as a means to a greater goal, whether it's social equity, whether it's environmental protection, whether it's economic prosperity, or hopefully all three, then we start to get into these really interesting conversations about not just smart urban development, but smart sustainable urban development. So then we start to get this hybrid term where smart and sustainable start to be used in the same phrase. It's two ideas, we've talked about previously, that, smart and sustainable, there's no real definitions of those. You put two things together, so that means it's a super non-defined term, right?
Yeah. And I guess these two words cause a lot of headache for some people, like sustainability, smart city, like these big words.
Yeah. So I mean, the hardest thing for me right now is to, do I say sustainable smart cities or do I say smart sustainable cities? But I mean, the important thing I think here, is to think about, do you want to live in a smart city or do you want to live in a sustainable city? And I think if you ask most people, they want to live in a sustainable city. And so what we want to think about is, smart is a means to achieve the sustainable city,
Yeah, yeah,
right? And so
yeah,
it's a, technology is not an end in itself. Technology is something we use to achieve a particular goal. And so if we can steer smart cities towards sustainability, then that's great. But if we're just pursuing smart cities because we've got this great technology and we want to be seen as the smartest city in the world and we want to be at the top of the rankings, well, that might help us in the short term in terms of getting some huge projects or getting people to move to a particular place. But it's in the long term, it's going to be an empty pursuit.
yeah. And this is actually what disturbs me a lot. That, like the thing that, okay, like separate a smart city and a sustainable city. Can't we just like put them together as how you said? So we don't need to think that a smart city is not a sustainable city just because of maybe some few solutions that we saw which are not smart. Then we judge the entire smart city that it's not sustainable. So tell me, what are our cities like? What are the challenges that we are facing? Our cities are facing now.
Yeah, so I mean, from my perspective, I think the big challenge that we're facing at the moment is the climate crisis. I think we're, particularly in the last 5 years, we've started to wake up to, the idea that it's not just about global warming and it's not just about climate change, but it's about a climate crisis, and that it's something we need to address. But we've seen action on the ground is very slow, and we're just gradually trying to address these global issues that we're facing. So I mean, one of the things that I've been thinking about is are there ways that we can start to create cities that are resilient and that we can do some sort of a managed retreat, so we can recognize that the climate is changing, we're going to get extreme conditions, and we need to start preparing for it now. And if you look out into society, there's these climate preppers, these people that are preparing for the very worst, and usually we look at those people and go, yeah, I don't think I'm going to do that. But I think there's maybe some things that we can learn from them. And I think it's really worth thinking about, are we sort of at this peak period of urbanization? And if so, what's coming on the other side of this peak? Are we going into, this gets really depressing, I apologize, but are we going into this long, kind of downward slide, where we had this triumphant, the triumph of the city of the 20th century, and the 21st century is about kind of the unraveling of all these systems. So I mean, I think another thing that's really interesting to me is that we've built up these cities over the last 150 years, and they're amazing, but they're old, and they need to be systemically retrofitted. So if we look at transportation networks or we look at energy networks, all these things need to be upgraded. And is this an opportunity for us to change those systems? So let me give you a specific example. Would be the flush toilet. The flush toilet uses water to take our human waste away from us, right? Um, Amazing invention, but incredibly consuming of water. And so, and now we've developed, wastewater treatment plants, and they work, fairly well, but they have high energy, high consumption of resources, very expensive to run. So how could you change the flush toilet system, to put it to composting toilets, or incineration toilets, which take a ton of energy too. But I mean, so thinking about these sort of legacy systems that we have, and what would you do to change those things? If I look around Stockholm today, I say, this isn't very different than it was 50 years ago or even 100 years ago. There's more cars here in Stockholm, right? But other than that, there's street lighting, but I mean, it hasn't changed really fundamentally for 100 years. And if we think about the smart city and we think about innovation and we think about, societal change, you know, is this going to be the same way in 100 years from now? Are we going to be living in the same neighborhoods? Am I going to be looking at my window on the same, in the same view, or is it going to be flying cars? Is it going to be, a completely different setup?
Yeah. Actually, what I see is a big change in cars, how cars look like.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah. So I mean, the design of cars is different, right? But they run on a combustion engine, which is 100 years old.
Yeah.
The roads are basically the same.
Yeah.
The street lights are the same. They've got LED lights now, but otherwise they're exactly the same. So
Yeah.
hasn't changed that much. I mean, it's surprising how durable the built environment is. Buildings, they don't change until you tear them down, really. So
yeah. Well, Andy, very, very interesting conversation. I'm so happy that we had this conversation, and I don't want to take so much of your time. So now let's finish this great episode by you giving us 3 takeaway messages first, and then a question. So let's start with the 3 takeaway messages.
Okay. So one takeaway message would be that the cities are being digitalized, and it's happening in a very gradual way. And we need to pay attention to this. But at the same time, I think we can be rest assured that it's early days. There's still time to do things differently. There's still time to steer this in different directions. So that's one thing I'd say is, digitalization is happening, but it's still early days. Another, I think, is I would say that digitalization is not inevitable, that it could happen in different ways. And that it's up to us to as urban planners, but also as citizens, as residents, to really steer technologies in ways that we think are beneficial, and not just accept them as being some sort of inevitable force that is working outside of human beings. So I think there's opportunities to steer digitalization in different directions. And then third, I think that there's some really nice synergies between digitalization and smart cities, but also sustainable urban development. But one of the things that we need to do is we need to put people first. We can't put technologies first. So it needs to be, we need to be starting with a existing problem that's out there, and then focus on, the different suite of technologies that we have in front of us, and other strategies that we can use to improve the human condition, and instead not have a technology-driven agenda. So I think that was 3, and then a question to listeners. I think. Yeah, so I think a question would be, to if you think about your life and the way that technologies are integrated into your life, how can you change things on an individual level, but how can we also change things on a collective level to improve our lives? And potentially this means not just adopting new technologies, but it could be about deciding not to use particular technologies. So that's something, just to go in, ponders, what's that role of technology in our lives, and what do we want it to be?
Super interesting. Well, Andy, thank you so much for giving your time and for inspiring us.
Okay, thanks very much, Mustafa.
Well, thank you so much for listening to Urbanistica podcast. I hope you really enjoyed this episode. You learned something new and also got inspired by the guest. Don't forget to share the episode on your social media and recommend it to people you think they are really interested in this topic. Thank you so much again for giving your valuable time to Urbanistica podcast. I am Mustafa Sharif. Keep up the good work. Keep loving cities.